But this is Monarch WebWorks presentation. It's Dr. Nebel has been kind enough to join us. And I'm going to introduce him briefly and then give him as much time as he wants. And we're really glad that he's here tonight and being willing to learn this new technology so he can do this. I found Dr. Nebel's curriculum many years ago, started teaching it to my kids, now teach it at Monarch WebWork and love it. And we were really glad that he would come. So he has two lifelong passions. It says science and teaching. He holds a BA from Earlham College and a PhD from Duke, has a number of science research papers to his credit, and in teaching, Nebel developed an environmental science course and authored a much-used environmental science text. In this effort, Dr. Nebel became increasingly mindful that solutions to environmental issues and countless other sorts of problems surrounding us all hinge on a foundation of scientific understanding, a foundation that many people lack. So Dr. Nebel observed that the basic ideas and principles of this foundation can and should be laid in the elementary years. His curriculum, Building Foundations of Scientific Understanding, is the result of those efforts. So tonight, he's going to describe 4 elements of teaching that are critical when we guide our children to this foundation of scientific understanding. And then at the end, he'll do question and answer. So use the chat box to pop out questions as you think of them. And when we get to the end, we'll come back and go through all those questions and answer as many as we possibly can. So, Dr. Nebel, the time is now yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Sherry. Do I need to punch anything here to... I have a big picture of you, and...
I will make you a big picture. How's that?
Oh, okay. Never seen myself that way, but anyway. We'll get started. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for that introduction, Sherry. Making sense of teaching science. But why doesn't it make sense? The real problem is when you start looking at science, you see so many different things. There's life science, there's chemistry, there's biology, there's astronomy, and then there's experimentation and methods, and it all gets rather confusing. So I spent some time thinking about this and came to the conclusion that the real essence of science is figuring things out, figuring how things work. And let me put this on the board here. Okay, is this such that everyone can see it in some manner or form?
As soon as you share screen, everyone here today will be able to see it.
Well, oh, okay, I need to share a screen, I'm sorry. Okay, here we go. Boom. Share screen, there. Is that share screen? Does that come up now? So for some reason.
Not yet. Oh, there it is.
Oh, there we are. Okay. Okay. So science is a process. Oh, I was going to tell a joke at the beginning, but the time is short, so I'll just tell this quick one about mental telepathy. Did everyone get it? So science is not about mental telepathy. Science is a process of figuring things out. It is both the process and the result of what we have figured out. But there are different ways of figuring. The ancients figured it out in terms of pagan gods, spirits, magic, and they believed they could influence things by sacrifices and other rather horrendous kinds of activities. Of course, our experience was that it was not very successful. And then in the late early 1500s, people discovered science. And that's an interesting concept as itself. It thinks that science has always sort of existed. But thinking was so much tied up in this ancient kind of thing that science itself had to be discovered. And I just read this book recently, The Invention of Science, The New History of the Scientific Revolution. And I'm not particularly recommending this, it's tremendously fat, but it's the story of how science itself was discovered and invented as a process of thinking and figuring things out. So what is scientific figuring? It's basically, let me scroll this down a bit. It's basically based on verifiable evidence, facts, things you can observe, touch, measure, smell, whatever. But it's verifiable evidence. And verifiable means that it's not just your inspiration, it's something that you can say, hey, come here, look at this. And anybody, everybody can verify it. And then it's the use of rational thinking to make sense of what you have observed, the evidence. And particularly important in the rational thinking is the cause-effect reasoning, observing that this causes that, that causes this, and you can extrapolate that back into the past or forward into the future. Cause-effect reasoning. And between the evidence and the cause-effect reasoning, one comes to basic conclusions as to how things work. You've figured it out. When we think of science, very often, let me pause and take a breath and let you type in any question there that you have of this. But when we think of science, very often we think of and we've been taught, experimental method, doing experiments, making hypotheses, testing them, etc. That is a very it's a way of simply expanding your cause-effect reasoning. It doesn't change this basic idea of verifiable evidence plus reasoning equals the conclusion. It's just in here that one does an experiment to test if this does cause that or if something else causes it. Let's just look at a couple examples. The solar system, we all know now that the sun is in the center and the planets revolve around the sun. How is that? How do we know that? It was verifiable evidence looking at the movements, rational cause-effect reasoning. It made much more sense to it fit into a whole total picture if the planets revolved around the sun rather than the sun going around the earth. Anatomy and physiology. We all know the organs of the body now and their functions. How was that all discovered? It was people painstakingly making observations, doing some tests, experiments, but cause-effect reasoning again gives us all our knowledge of and understanding of anatomy and physiology. Chemistry. We all know now that there's atoms and molecules and so on. Again, that was figured out through years of painstaking testing, observing, verifiable evidence, cause-effect reasoning, and it all fit together. And the very important thing here is this process of scientific figuring out is highly successful. It enables predictions. It enables technology. All technology is based on what has been figured out. And potentially it enables control to a greater, we can't control everything. We can have very excellent now weather prediction. We still can't control the weather, but maybe we can later in history. Okay, again, type in any questions there that come to mind here. But let's turn now to, what does this have to do with teaching? We want kids to become able to figure things. You know, I wanted to make a diagram back here, and somehow it escaped me. But this process of figuring things out, you can look at it as this is what we have figured out. This is things that we are figuring out, the current research going on. And then there are big questions beyond that that will come up in the future. And these lines are not solid, strict lines. We are gradually pushing them in this direction, figuring out more and more things, but more and more questions arising, so that this is an ongoing, moving process of figuring out how things work. Okay, and as I just said, it is highly successful. It enables prediction. All our technology is based on having figured things out. We can build this machine that takes advantage, including this technology we're currently using. It's all based on scientific understanding of having figured things out. Well, what does this say about our teaching? We want kids to become able to figure things out. We don't want them just to have stuff facts in their head. We really want them to come to a state where they can figure things out. And this doesn't apply to just science, does it? I mean, how many other kinds of situations in the world do we need to figure out? And this same process can work in other areas besides science. So this process of helping kids, guiding them to figure things out, needs to be incorporated into our lessons. This is what is real science, and is real science. Memorization of scientific words is not science. Observation and reasoning are science. I remember a second grader, I asked her what her science lessons were, and she showed me a diagram of the heart, and they were memorizing all the different parts of the heart. And I wanted to sit down and cry. That's not science, that's just rote memorization of something she had no concept of really what the heart was doing and so on. She's just a second grader. Anyway, so memorization is not science. Observation and reasoning are. So we need to make our lessons, base them on observation, reasoning, and figuring them out. Okay, coming to some basic ideas of teaching. New information, we all experience this, that new information clicks in and sticks when there are hooks to hang it on. What are the hooks? The hooks are if the new information builds and expands on what we already know. If it integrates and makes connections between things we know. And if it relates to our real world experience. These are the hooks we need to have in our lessons to build the real understanding and knowledge. So BFSU, as far as I'm able, I wrote according to these ideas. And I know you can't see this, but I thought I'd just throw it up here. A flow chart of the lessons for volume 1. People are taken back and overwhelmed and totally turned off by this. But don't be, because this is all the lessons for 3 years. So if we just take it one step at a time, then we can, in 3 years, work through it. But just to illustrate how this works, I've started by dividing science into the usual categories, which I call the nature of matter. This gets into chemistry gradually, step by step. Life sciences, physical science, and technology. Of course, technology sort of relates to all the sciences, but typical technology is mostly in the physical science area, so I put it there. And earth and space science. So these are the 4 basic divisions of science that I have in this flow chart. If I can put it where we can see it. Okay, here's the nature of matter, life science, physical science and technology, and earth and space science. The way this, and then under each of these, is a gradual building from basic things that the kindergartner can see and deal with on up gradually. And it goes all the way in volumes 2 and 3 to grade 8. Let's just take some examples of how this connects. I know you can't see this, but I can just point and pretend. This whole sequence starts, although there's no specific way, you can start it in different ways and have flexibility. But I like to point out here that the basic concept of thinking is organizing things into categories. Kids can relate this to their real lives by simply seeing how their homes are organized, things in the kitchen are organized into cutlery, dishes, etc. And they can relate this to in stores and the way things in stores are organized in categories. So they get the idea of categories, but then we immediately relate this over here to distinguishing living, natural, non-living, and human-made things. Maybe if I put this here and stop jumping around with it. So they use their skill of categorization to look at how everything in the world can be categorized according to living, natural, non-living, and human-made things. Or another way of categorizing everything is solids, liquids, gases. And this relates over here to the whole Earth. The Earth can be looked at in terms of air, the atmosphere, solids, the rock material, and the water of the oceans and lakes, etc. So the idea here is, in following this BFSU curriculum, is you work back and forth and gradually going down. This way, everything builds in steps, but at the same time, you're integrating. And as kids relate one thing to another, this is where they get the ideas that help them figure things out. Okay, again, let me take a breath and let you type in any questions. Coming down here, anatomy and physiology. typically one teaches kids about the organs of the body. I looked at this, and what do kids observe first? They observe that animals move. How do they move? Well, they have this skeletal system, and kids, my 2-year-old grandson has observed that there are bones in in the body. And how do bones and muscle make the animal move? You can show kids that. They can figure it out, that the muscles contract, the arm moves. Sort of jumping around here, trying to keep on screen, not entirely successfully. So I start down here in the life science, not giving all the organs of the body, but basically asking the question, how do animals move? And letting kids figure it out with the skeletal muscle system. But then you come to, okay, how do we coordinate those movements? How do we make them go and stop? We have a brain, and that signals, and with the sensory system, that signals go from the sensory eyes, ears, to the brain, are interpreted, and that tells us to move one direction or the other. And then finally, come to, how is there energy to make this thing move? And that brings in, well, back here, I introduced the concept of energy with what does it take to make things go? The typical thing is understanding in elementary education is that energy is too difficult for kids to understand, so don't teach energy. The result is total confusion because if you don't give kids some real information, they'll figure out the little green man and they'll come up with their own naive ideas. So I found that you can introduce energy at the kindergarten stage, or grade 1 at least, with simply asking them, what does it take to make this thing go? It's light for the little calculator, solar calculator. It's heat to fry an egg. It's a push to make something spin a water wheel, and so on. So it takes energy to make things go. And this becomes a very basic idea in the distinction between plants and animals. Animals, what does it take to make them go? Food. What does it take to make a plant go? Light. And so you start introducing that down here, and then you can build details on that step by step. So note here that the emphasis is on giving kids a conceptual understanding, figuring it out, not on memorizing words. There's much too much. Sometimes I think that education is based on what is easiest to test. It's easy to give a lot of words and then test if kids have learned the words, matching them with the right definition. That's not science. It's figuring out and getting a conceptual understanding of how things and processes work. So that's the general idea of the curriculum. Individual lessons, I've tried to write in a manner that leads kids to first observe and then reason. I've had complaints from some of my users that make it simple, just tell us what the kids should learn, period. And no, that's not it. The kids need to be learning first to observe and reason and figure things out. And that's what will give a basis of scientific understanding and recognizing that this is what science is. It's a matter of figuring things out. It is getting near halftime, but very briefly, methodology, how do you get kids to figure things out? Our failing as teachers is that we love to impart information. It's just the natural instinct of a teacher is to tell kids, load this information, and then you test them and see if they've learned it. We need to get over that in a way. Teaching needs to be about getting kids to use their own minds. Answers don't get kids to think. Questions do. So invite, encourage, make it safe for kids to ask questions. And also pose your own questions, even if you don't really know the answer. I know teachers are very reticent to do that. They don't want to expose what they don't know. But that's all right. I mean, none of us knows, has any even a tiny percentage of what might be known. So if questions occur, role model just posing this question. And kids may ask you, what's the answer? I don't know. The question just came. Maybe we can explore it. Maybe we can write it down, explore it later. Science begins with questions, not answers. That's the key thing. You don't get an answer unless you ask the question first. So allow ample time for kids to think and respond to questions. Don't give them immediate responses. And you don't need to give them when they answer a question, our inclination of teachers is to say, that's right, or no, that's wrong. The idea which I propose is that right answers should be responded to by, how do you support that? Kids should be able to know the reasoning, the evidence that this is based on. And wrong answers, don't immediately say that's wrong and call on another student. Ask, if that, then what? And then the idea is, if a kid gives a wrong answer and then thinks about it and what that answer implies, you can lead them to see that it leads to an absurdity or an impossibility. And then change the answer. This is the essence of the Socratic method. This is what Socrates was famous for. And he's known as the greatest teacher of all time. But he would simply follow this kind of teaching. How do you support that answer? If that answer, then what does it imply? Where do you go from there? And oh gosh, that's ridiculous, isn't it? I'll change that answer. The second common failing of teachers is that we don't want to get caught not knowing an answer or getting it wrong. In fact, there will be times that we do get it wrong. Role model that that's okay. Kids need to learn that we all make mistakes, and life is a process of recognizing the mistake, sorting it out, and trying something different. And finally, hopefully getting it right. Okay, that brings us to 9:30. That worked out just about right. Leaving lots of time for questions here. I do want to note here that in connection with the Building Foundations of Scientific Understanding textbook, I meant to hold that up and, gosh, I can't believe I wrote the whole thing. But there it is, volume 1, and then there's volumes 2 and 3 as well. It wasn't an easy job. Maybe that's because I'm not really smart. Anyway, in connection with the book, if you've been using it, you have found that there are many places where I simply ask you or suggest you Google to get further information. I've created this additional website now, bfsucommunity.com. And in there, I have all the lessons laid out. And you can click on the lesson and you can find the links to those, at least the Google sites that I have found that give you the graph, the photograph, variety of photographs, other information that will help with the lesson. So if you're using BFSU at all, I do suggest that you make use of this bfsucommunity.com. There's no charge, I monitor it. You can also post questions in there, make comments, whatever. And I do welcome any of you to email me directly, bnebel@earls.com. And so my effort is all to help you teach science to the next generation of kids. So good luck. And okay, questions, comments. This has been really quick, so I don't, we can go back and expand on any part of this that you would like.
I saw just a little bit coming through in the chat box, kind of some questions of, this isn't my strongest subject. How am I going to teach this to my child? And then one was another question from Jessica. At what point does science go from just being the hands-on to the conceptual understanding?
Let's take the first question first. I've written BFSU with enough detail, and intentionally so, that a person without scientific background or understanding can learn along with your kids. And the comment I like most from users is that, hey, I learned a lot too. Because, the way education is, most of us do not have a good background in science. For the most part of my life, I didn't either. And I still don't. I won't claim anything beyond what I've put out there. So follow BFSU and learn along with your kids. And you can do that. And I think that's the best possible role model to be, is learning along with their kids. So I really encourage that.
I would second that, Dr. Nebel. I have had lots of science classes, and the way that you put the concepts together, even in the kindergarten to second grade book, I was going, oh, that's why. And so, and there are times I don't understand a concept even as I'm teaching it at Monarch, and I'm thinking, pressure and temperature was a toughie for me, and I modeled in front of those kids. This one's been hard for me. Help me understand it. But I understand why my hairspray bottle gets cold when I spray my hairspray now. So
yeah.
I would second what you're saying.
Great. Thank you. I really enjoy comments like that are what keep me going, really. So the question was, how do you go from...
I'll read it to you. She asked, typically science is a natural topic for children to inquire and experiment hands-on, but at what point does science make sense conceptually instead of just what's before their senses?
I don't think there is any specific time involved there. I think it's a process that sort of takes place gradually and naturally by itself. And some kids are really good at conceptualizing things and getting a a larger picture of the whole thing. Other kids really have trouble with that.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think there's any single answer there, but you teach it and give the ideas and hope that they take root.
Thanks. Okay, and there's another one. Would BFSU work well for teaching a 6-year-old and a 13-year-old at the same time? I'm guessing yes, but I want more details.
It depends on the background of the kids. And many 13-year-olds have not had a background. So it can, and people have said that it does work. Of course, depends on the kids. In some cases, it won't work. But these basic concepts and developing them are just as important for the 13-year-old as the 6-year-old, and often the 13-year-old has not had these concepts. And it's possible to allow and facilitate the 13-year-old going much deeper, doing further reading, doing further model building or whatever with an experimentation, so that the 13-year-old can benefit while the younger 6-year-old is still getting the basic idea.
Thanks. I would say too, with my kids, when I started, some of them were older and I wanted them to have the concepts. So we went really quickly to make sure they really understood the concepts, and then moved them into the 3 to 5 and worked with the younger ones in the K to 2. But they are foundational, like you say in the title. And like I mentioned before, the way that you explained solids, liquids, and gases with the activity, we played that in our front room with the kids, and we still go back to that in our minds so that we have an understanding. Oh wait, solids are always touching all the time. Liquids are touching, but they're moving. And that helped all my kids, even as they've gone to, high school level work. We have another question. Well, let's see. I'm homeschooling a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old. We're currently using the second volume, and I'm considering going back to BFSU of MSSE to shore up foundations. We didn't use it, but I wish we had. So more of a comment than a question. But anyway, are there other questions that you have for Dr. Nebel about any specific things in science or teaching or his methods? Anywhere that you feel like you want more help? He's here to answer things for us. Do you want to stop screen sharing, Dr. Nebel, so they can see you better, or do you want to be able to still show it?
No, I can turn this off.
We'll make you the big screen. There you go. Now they can see your chart better. Has everyone here used BFSU, or almost all of you? Yeah. So we have one saying the same thing. They appreciate it very much, and they appreciate the interconnectedness of the strands, and adds another layer of complexity to organizing their concepts. Another just ordered the book. It does, she says it seems daunting, Sajila. It does seem daunting when you see that thing, but when you get in there, it's not so bad. Another thing that has helped me, I can pass this along to you too, Dr. Nebel, is I'll go through the lessons and I will highlight the questions that he points out throughout the lesson, and then realize, aha, there's the questions that he's asking, that I can then remind myself what questions to ask as we're having the discussion. And for me, the biggest thing that's helped is to realize that I'm trying to do what he said, help my child figure it out, help my child make the connection. So it's a lot different than we may have taught in other situations, because you're not just telling them all the information. You're trying to guide them to figure it out for themselves, and that can be kind of hard to get used to. Another thing, any suggestions or ideas for introducing the idea of spending time studying science? I don't know about others, but we sometimes have trouble getting excitement and interest going in topics and subject areas we feel are important, but maybe the kids haven't come to that conclusion yet. So do you have any good suggestions for getting kids that aren't into science to be a little more interested?
Another big problem I see and feel is that schooling so often is, okay, it's 2:00, it's time for whatever class, you do it from 2 to 3:00, and then it's out. Science is something that is all around us all the time. And as I mentioned along the way, a very important part of science is relating it to the real world. So anything we see anywhere has a science component. And if we're aware of how it connects, if we can ask a question, well, there's birds in my backyard. Where are they going? What are they doing? How are they? And the weather, what's bringing this storm? What's making it rain? What's causing the drought? You can pose the questions and that are science without having a science class. Maybe you can add to that.
I like your teachable moments in all of your things, though, too, where I know if you don't have the curriculum, Sherry, he has a teachable moment where it's kind of watch for this, or here's a great way to connect it to what's already maybe going on so it doesn't feel like a science lesson. It's something that grows out a little bit more naturally. I know as homeschoolers, we tend to want to maybe do science, but those questions are still good ways to get them going with something interesting. I find my kids sometimes resisting a little, but then as soon as I get the stuff out or we start doing things, they suddenly gravitate back in and they want to know why. And then we have just a discussion together and they don't realize how much they're really learning and doing on their own. So I'm a little bit sneaky. There's a question.
I think you say it beautifully.
Thanks. There's a question if you have a list of more advanced books. So like if someone's starting with those foundations K through 2, but you're doing it with a middle schooler, do you have on your website the more advanced books or any suggestions there?
Yes, I have. At the BFSU community site, you will see a cover of all 3 volumes. And clicking on that cover will take you directly to a purchase point. Or you can just look at the titles and go to Amazon and, well, actually, if you just type BFSU into the search on Amazon, it'll take you to the volumes.
The books. What about, how you have further reading at the end of each lesson? Do you have further reading? So for your first volume, which is K through 2, do you have further readings on those subjects at older levels? Has anyone tackled that?
Yeah. I'm very much indebted to a Carol Ritchie. She's a librarian and also mother and homeschooler. And she took it upon herself to compile those lists of books.
Awesome.
And many people have commented that those are valuable. Don't feel that they are required reading. The essence here is to have kids, number one, reinforce their lesson, that they can read the same thing, maybe with different words in a different source.
Mm-hmm.
And they can work on reading comprehension and so on too. It correlates reading and writing with their science, which I think is absurd not to do.
We like those too. And our libraries had a lot of them because we are in a bigger area now. It's nice. F. Walters says there's a blog, it's Nurture Creek. That's really helpful. She goes through your book apparently and puts a lot of activities and videos on how she's implementing your curriculum. I've not heard of that one, so I'll have to be checking that out. I'm excited.
Nurture. I haven't heard of that either.
Yeah, Nurture Creek. If you have a URL, that would be awesome, F. Walter, if you want to put that in there. And then let's see. So Bev asks you, I've been using the K through 2 book for a year, homeschooling with 2 daughters, K and second. Sometimes I have trouble when we want to follow a rabbit trail off the flow chart, but it's an area covered later. Skip to the new area or wait? So she wanted to grow things long before B11.
I think that's an arbitrary decision. I know that will happen over and over again. But part of my intention in BFSU is to make it flexible. I'm not beyond the basic idea of moving back and forth across the flow chart and working your way gradually down. It's flexible. And I think there may be times when you do want to jump ahead and explore. And, it depends on the kids and their ability to comprehend the further information. And so I'm dodging your question.
He's dumping it back on you.
No, it's flexible. And I think you have to use your own judgment and simply decide
where to go with it.
There may be a point where it just becomes too complicated beyond your understanding. I know nuclear physics is beyond my understanding.
All right. Well, the blog link is in the chat box for those that didn't see it, so thank you. Are there any other questions or any other comments? You're also welcome to use the microphone. You can speak directly to Dr. Nebel if you'd like to. I have really appreciated the curriculum. I like that it teaches them to think. That's one of the reasons that I was attracted to it. It is a little bit harder to teach at first. It just takes a little bit of a mindset shift like you were talking about. But my children have learned a lot more, and we've been hit and miss. We've done better, and then we haven't done it for a while. And then it's interesting, we'll come back to it and realize that it became a little bit of a way of looking at the world, and that they had actually done some of the lessons when we didn't realize it. So we were actually not really that far behind. And I have seen the huge value in the foundation coming back later for my kids in their further understanding of chemistry. And I can see a difference when I teach science right now with the kids that already have the foundation of, for example, like the structure of matter versus the ones that don't. When you're trying to talk about diffusion, if you don't understand molecules, and that's the other thing I love about your program, that you know what has to be taught first. Conceptually, they need to understand these things before they can really know what they're doing here. Otherwise, they're just memorizing science words.
Thank you. I think you said that very beautifully, and that's exactly my intent, was to build it in steps, logical, systematic steps, so that kids, I've seen programs that lead kids directly and at the early grades into atoms and molecules. And you know darn well they don't have the background to understand what that is. At best, they memorize rote stuff and have no understanding of what it really is. And that's sad. And they grow up basically not understanding science and not liking science because all it was this demand to memorize things. And, that's just sad.
Mm-hmm. Edie wants to know if Carol Ritchie's book lists have been migrated over to your BFSU community website. Are they over there?
No, you do have to get a copy of BFSU.
Okay.
You can get e-copies of the book for $5, and it's also on Kindle and other electronic formats. But I don't have any of the lessons or any of the text on the BFSU community site. You basically need the book in front of you and be doing the lesson, and the BFSU community just gives you an easy way to add on the videos or graphs or pictures or photographs or whatever.
Okay. You just have a comment. I think the series is great. Thank you for writing it and offering it and for speaking tonight. I love the question-based methodology. Oh, somebody else posted. I got to scroll. I really see a difference in my kids' interest level and their developing reasoning ability as we go through the lessons. I look forward to exploring your website. And then another comment says, we sometimes venture off topic a bit, such as the kids developed a fascination with field crickets last fall. They picked them up and made all sorts of observations without being specific science time, just outdoor play. They ended up making all sorts of discoveries, such as the ovipositor. It fit nicely with BFSU, and we love the flow chart.
Great. Yeah, that is science. I think too much of teaching science focuses on the formality of doing an experiment with a control. A great deal of science just starts with that description of, hey, here's crickets, aren't they fun to look at? And look at what they're doing, and keep crickets with some carrots or something for food. And just observing is real science. Mm-hmm. And wherever it leads. So I strongly recommend facilitating your kids going where their interests take them. And, many professional scientists, if you interview them about what interested them in science, very often, I haven't systematically done this in any way. I sometimes think I'd like to. But if you interview them, how did you get interested in science? And they will go back to their childhood of just playing with crickets. It's really, that's the beginning of science, is just being allowed to play with these things and observe them and do to their as far as they wish.
I have heard another scientist say that. She's a NASA physicist and engineer, and she said the same thing. Well, my dad let me tinker with things, and I didn't know that was any different. And Annika says she was incredibly excited when she discovered the program. The progression's exactly what makes sense to her, and she had no idea how to do it since she doesn't have any science education, but she'll be learning right along with her kids. So.
Great.
You'll do great, Annika.
Yes. Going back to what I was just saying, my own interest as a kid was I was fascinated by how things work. I took apart the old-fashioned clocks with all the gears and other things, and just observed how they worked. And my mother facilitated that. She allowed me to make messes and have clocks totally taken apart, old clocks that weren't too valuable. And, so I often think that it's a shame that something like a cell phone, even if you take it apart, you have no idea where it's all you find is some chips, solid things that make no sense whatsoever. So you can get your kids some of the old clocks and whatever, the old radios, with tubes and
bigger parts.
Yeah, that they can just take apart and play with.
One of my proudest moments was when my boys literally took apart and then fixed my toaster. I was like, yes, I've been waiting my whole life for this. They fixed the spring on it and concocted how they were going to do it, and it worked great for another, I think, year or so. And I was like, yeah, that's what I wanted to see happen. Kids that could figure out what was wrong and how to put it back together with this very simple machine. My husband thought that was pretty funny, but it's like, I am a successful mother. So Carol says that not having the scripted lessons has been kind of scary, but also very freeing. And so she wanted to say thank you because she doesn't feel like she has to stick to a lesson. And I think a lot of us would agree. Edie asked me tips for getting through the K through 2 book quickly. So if your kids are older, Edie, I would say what I did is I looked through, okay, I'm pretty sure my children understand these concepts. And I would go to the book and make sure that I felt like they did. And then I would either just sneak in a quick conversation or a book from the library to make sure they really understood the concept. Or one of my other favorite tricks with my children is have the older one teach the younger one. And then I can see if they really understand it and they don't feel like they're doing little kid work. They're the teacher now.
That's a wonderful idea, yes.
So, and a lot of times I just knew, because I know my kids, oh no, they understand this. We can move forward on this now because they've played with it a lot. And the lessons build so well on each other. Sometimes they would take it to the next lesson on their own. I know that seems hard to believe to people who haven't used it, but they would. And then I'd be like, oh, I guess we don't really need to do that one. So, and the last comment here is just, what is so great about your program is your encouragement and openness to what's around you and being free to follow interests, not scripted textbooks, but still getting a solid scientific curriculum. And I agree. I really like that. I know with your strands, we've kind of hit all the bases, but I know that my primary goal has been, and yours, I can see it in your curriculum, is learning to think a certain way. Because even if I miss a lesson, if they can think a certain way, they'll be fine. They'll be able to reason through it next year when they encounter it.
Great, great. Let me make one last closing thing that I forgot along the way. I don't know if any of you are being faced with the next generation science standards that are becoming compulsory in some states. 17 states, I think, have adopted these next generation science standards, NGSS. The new editions of volumes 1 and 2 do incorporate those standards. Everything you described, Shelley, is still true. You have the freedom and so on, but those standards are basically natural fallouts of BFSU. You don't have to teach to the standards. The standards are actually written that they are thinking oriented. Mm. And performance oriented.
Yeah.
And FSU will do it. Whether or not you know about the standards or not, you'll be accomplishing those standards with BFSU, whether you need to or not.
I like that about it. I have 2 kids that chose to go to school this year, and I was shocked at A, how little science they actually do in school now, and B, how far advanced my kids were from what I thought was our not so good implementation of BFSU. So we're going to be working on helping their teacher a little bit with using BFSU in her classroom, I hope. We'll see if that happens or if I just yank them back home. I don't know.
I hope that happens. You know, I'd like to see BFSU used in traditional schools.
Yeah.
So far, I haven't been able to
get it there.
But it is our hour. Thank you so much, Shelley. This has really been fun.
Thank you very much.
And if any of the audience here wishes to email me and arrange this kind of session, I would be willing to do so. So great. I hope.
What was your email again that you wanted them to go to? I'm going to put it in the chat box.
Yeah, bnebel at EROLS.com.
Okay, I got that in the chat box for them. And this video it's recorded. It'll be posted to YouTube unlisted. So with the link, people can go to it. It will go to members of Monarch WebWork, and it will go to Dr. Nebel. So you can put it where you'd like to, Dr. Nebel, so people can see it as well. You can put it on the community site. I'm sure people there would probably really like to watch it. So
great.
Thank you so much for your time, everyone. Thank you for being here, especially Dr. Nebel. I know this technology was new for him, and we really appreciate him doing it. You did great.
Well, thank you very much.
Have a good night.
Good night to you.